All right, this is Swift Heroes 2021. I'm Josh Holtz, and this is how to think like a SwiftUI ViewModifier. Um, Quick little information about me. I'm a co-founder at Cat. Cat is a software consulting company based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the United States. Um, we do a lot of uh, backend software consulting, front end web, and mobile. I mainly focus on mobile. It was a lot of iOS. Now Fastlane is my main work, as I'm the lead maintainer of Fastlane. That's my 9 to 5. Um, as lead maintainer, I do a lot of pull request merging, work on new features, handle issues, pretty much everything and anything that is related to Fastlane. Um, and That's, I guess, a short gist about me. One other thing, I do have a stutter, which usually for giving talks at conferences is a little bit of a bigger deal. Since I'm pre-recording this, it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but if there's a little splice in the video, it may be because of this. Um, but I just like to mention this as it is a little bit of who I am. All right, first, why are we talking about SwiftUI? Well, I recently released 2 apps in the App Store over the past like 6 months. The first one was ConnectKit. It's a iOS shortcuts based app for interacting with App Store Connect API. That's kind of where my Fastlane interest led me to. And I wanted to get back into doing iOS development. And SwiftUI is what kind of really sparked that. It's a fun new approach for making iOS apps. I did UIKit for a while, but SwiftUI kind of sparked my interest back up into making my own apps because it looked fun, looked easy to do, um, and you kind of prototype and create things pretty rapidly. That app wasn't a lot of SwiftUI. It was mainly dealing with shortcuts, but it was a good introduction into kind of how SwiftUI works. My second app is in Otter RSS. This one was a lot more UI. It's an RSS reader that doesn't integrate with any other services. It just syncs your feeds and what you've read over iCloud, so you can sync them between your iPhone, iPad, and Mac app. And that's also in SwiftUI. Um, and When making an outer RSS, I end up using ViewModifiers a lot, running into a lot of issues, not exactly understanding how they were meant to be used, how they actually work on the inside. So that's kind of where this talk came from. Is once I got finished building out our RSS, I kind of wanted to dive a little deeper into view modifiers, and that's why I'm giving this talk. So we're gonna talk about my first SwiftUI experience, even before both those apps. I just wanted to create a little label with a background and a border. The border in this case would be black, the background is red, and just a simple hello world. Um, Something like this shouldn't be too hard. Doing this uh, with a UI label in UIKit wouldn't be terrible. Um, I mean, background color is a property, border is kind of a property. Something like this seems like a good place to start. So I opened up Xcode, started a new project, and got a text hello world. I'm like, okay, that seems simple enough. When I add a background color red, because that's the first thing that I see, red. I'm like, okay, then let's add some padding to the background. Well, no padding showed up. So I was like, okay, maybe a border will extend it or something like that. So that's what I ended up with. And my face was probably something like this. I was like, it doesn't really make sense. Like I have a text view that I'm setting a background property on, I'm setting a padding property on, and a border property, and it's not really stretching the background the way that I want. So I did what any uh, good programmer does and comment out what I had and start over. So I decided to reverse it this time, and I was like, okay, let's go border first, and then padding, and then background. Kind of see what happened, and that is not what I was expecting at all. The border is taking up some of the space on top of the text, and then the background overflows, and I'm like, I don't really understand what's going on. Like, probably should have read some docs first, or maybe a few tutorials, but I kind of always like jumping in head first and seeing what problems I run into, and this was a really weird first problem. So decided to take a step back, and I was like, how does a view modifier work? Like, how are these methods I'm calling on this view modify what's being displayed on the screen? So I decided to take, oh, I was angry. I was angry because, it should have just worked as always. So here I am thinking like, how can I think this through, and make it work the way I want while understanding it? So I decided to do a real world example. Instead of having a label with some properties and stuff that I didn't understand, I decided to pretend that I was the view myself. So we created a Josh view, and we added shoes, um, but then we added socks, and socks don't usually end up on top of shoes like that. We put on a hoodie so we can go outside with the hood up because it's cold out. And then, oh wait, I forgot I wanted an actual t-shirt with The Incredibles on it, but now that's over my hoodie. And I'm like, okay, this is starting to look like what my text view example did. Like, I had the things, but the things weren't lining up properly. And then to top it all off, I put a hat over the hood because it's also sunny out. So I was like, no, that's not right. So how does view modifiers, how do they work? Like, what's the order of operation here? And it turns out it's not just properties on a thing. It kind of builds up along the way. So we started back over. There's me again. First we put on the socks. Socks are being applied over my feet. Shoes then are being applied over my socks. A t-shirt is just being put on, applied over me. Still The Incredibles. And I decided to put the hat on first this time. Again, being applied over me. And then we have the hoodie with the hood up over the hood. That makes a little more sense than having the hat over the hood. So it turns out I was thinking about this in a completely wrong way. So going back to the first example and actually get the iOS app with actual SwiftUI working the way that it's supposed to. So we have the text with Hello World. So I first added a border. I'm like, okay, we're gonna work through this maybe a little backwards, but I want the border, and the border's there, but it's overlapping the Hello World text. So let's add padding before the border. Perfect, there it is. Okay, so now we need to add the background color, and I want the background color to not only be behind the Hello World, but also be an area that was included with the padding. So to add that, that makes sense to put it after the padding so that any space that the padding added also got the background color. So we did it. You kind of have to think about it in a different way. It's not really self-explanatory at first, but thinking about it the way that about me putting on my clothes kind of helped me look at how SwiftUI was building this view in the background. We did it. So now what can we do? We're gonna get a little bit extreme here. So I was like, okay, if text views don't have like a single padding property or background or border, can we just keep adding on to it? So let's decorate it with another round of padding, background, and border, and then another one. So It turns out that it just keeps redecorating or applying things onto the the view and the things that were already applied. So we added padding, we added background, we added border, we added padding, background, border, and one more time. So I don't know, I wouldn't probably put this in an app, but it was kind of cool to see, okay, this is how this is how these methods are actually applying changes to my text view. So we're gonna do the same thing on my real world example. So instead of having socks, shoes, t-shirt, hat, hoodie, dressed correctly, we're gonna add in another pair of shoes, another hat, and a hat, and a hat, and then a hoodie without the hood up. So there's my extreme real world example of kind of how view modifiers work in real life, where I'm the view, my clothes are the view modifiers. I don't usually go out like that. But why was this so hard for me to understand? I have at this point I had like 9 years experience doing iOS development with UIKit, a little bit of AppKit experience, and then I did front end web, which is some UI stuff, but like things just didn't click for me. Well, it turns out I was like amazed by this SwiftUI and all the fancy things that I saw that people were doing to it, but I had this UIKit mindset that was holding me back from really understanding how SwiftUI worked. Um, so like views don't have individual properties. So in UIKit, a label has a background color, it has a border, and it has you can make it have padding. It doesn't really have padding like this, um, but you can't have multiple background or borders or padding on a single view. You have to then wrap it in a view and wrap it in a view and wrap it in a view. And that's kind of how SwiftUI was working. So just a Josh thought here is maybe view modifiers don't actually modify a single view like I was expecting it to, like in UIKit. Maybe they just add onto a view. So I was like, okay, so let's try this again. Let's add multiple borders onto this text view. So border, border, border. And I had to kill my app a few times and restart it. And I'm like, where are the extra borders? Well, if you remember when we applied the border to the text view without anything on it, it was overlapping the hello world text, meaning the border doesn't get applied outside the view, it gets applied internally. So we have 4 borders here, but they're just drawn on top of each other. So we added a padding of 5 because the border width is 5. And there we go. Okay, so it extended the view 5 pixels each side, and then it drew the border on top of that padding. So if we do it again and again, we get this super duper thick border. I mean, I could have just done a border with width of 20 and added some more padding initially, but this is just a contrived example. So what technically is a view modifier then? Well, it turns out that if I would have probably gone to the docs first instead of experimenting, I may have had a better idea, but also this may have just confused me a little bit more. But a view modifier is a modifier that you apply to a view or another view modifier, that's kind of the key there, producing a different version of the original view. So when we added the padding onto the text, we were applying a view modifier onto that view. When we added a background color, it wasn't applying the background color to the view, which is the text, it was applying the background color to the padding view modifier, which modified the view. So our background color was getting the extra padding in it that the padding gave to the view. So kind of had this chain of applying to a view modifier, applying to a view modifier, applying to a view modifier. And it took me a long time to actually understand that. It took me a lot of messing up. But I think now I get it. Hopefully I get it. So this is what the view modifier protocol looks like, which again, if I would have looked at this right away, I probably would have been confused. So it's a protocol that has an associated type of body, which is a view. It takes in some content and returns the view. And there's a type alias content, which I'm not giving a talk on protocols, associated types, and type aliases because it's not my strong suit. But I'm like, okay, so a view modifier just takes a view and returns a view. Okay, that kind of makes sense. That's kind of what the doc said. That's kind of what my experimentation showed me. And then views have a function called modifier on them, which takes a modifier and then returns modified content, which the modified content is self and t. So again, this is a little bit confusing to me. I'm not going to explain this, probably in the right terms, but it takes a modifier and returns the modified, like the previous modified content with the new content, maybe something like that. I think that's how it works. So again, that's not what my talk's about, but it's more about view modifiers. So I was like, let's create our own view modifier this time. So I'm gonna do the most simple view modifier that I could do, which was a no operation view modifier. So don't do this in production because it's probably just a waste of CPU cycles and all of that technical stuff. So first things first, we have a struct that I'm calling no-op. It adheres to the protocol ViewModifier. It has a body which takes in some content, and then it returns some view. So here, that's all it does is it takes in the content and just returns the content. Then I decided to extend view with the function called no-op, which you call modifier on the view and pass in the no-op view modifier. So this then executes the no-op view modifier on the view and returns the view directly again. But it's not the exact same view. It should be a new copy of the view. So here we are, text, hello world, no-op, 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 no-op. Cool. So that does absolutely nothing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times. But I got it to compile. It ran. It did its thing of being a view modifier that didn't do anything. So let's take our first example that I wanted to do, the background of red, black border, and turn that into a view modifier so I don't have to put 3 extra lines of code and I can reuse it. So we have a really poorly named struct called red background black border. It's pretty hard coded as the name, but that's what we made it. We're gonna put that padding on there, add a background color of red, and then we added the border color black with 5 again. And we're gonna put an extension on view called red background black border, and then just call self modifier with our view modifier again. We don't have to add this extension on there, but it does make reuse a little bit easier. So here it is. We have the text with hello world, and the method is red background black border, and it did the thing. So I'm like, what if we call it again and again? There it is. So this is the exact same thing that I did earlier with copying and pasting the padding background border, padding background border, padding background border, but I just did it with the view modifier 3 times. Again, I probably shouldn't do this on the same view 3 times, but we could reuse this on multiple views throughout our entire app. Cool, so that's it. View modifier just makes a copy of the view and does things to it. That's what the docs told me. I may have understood it a little bit sooner. But we can finally make stuff now. So let's make some cool stuff with view modifiers. So we're gonna make a reflection ViewModifier, uh, and then a tap to unblur ViewModifier, and then a swipeable row. I don't know if I spelled that right. ViewModifier. The first one, the reflection ViewModifier, is going to be a pretty basic ViewModifier again, something like the one that we just created with the border and background. But it's going to be calling, it's going to be using the content that we passed in twice, which feels a little bit weird. You're like, why are you going to put the same view in there twice? But you'll see how it's used there. Then we have a tap to unblur ViewModifier. This example is going to show how you can take a ViewModifier and have some state, update some state, and actually have like some user interaction in the ViewModifier. This is kind of nice because again, you can reuse it throughout your app multiple times and then kind of abstract this logic out so it's not in your main view. And then this third one is actually kind of what inspired me to go through with this talk, and it's this swipeable row ViewModifier. And something that I discovered that was missing in SwiftUI when making an outer RSS. I wanted a list where you could just swipe and have options to delete, mark as favorite, mark as read, but there was no, this wasn't built into SwiftUI. But a UI table view, I think, has some of this stuff built in. Again, it's been a while since I've done UI kit, but I think some of that's built in. But there are also some nice things you could pull into your UI kit app that add this pretty easily. So I want to turn this into a ViewModifier, something that it could be called pretty easily. It was customizable, and I could reuse within multiple apps. And I also wanted to learn along the way. So this is my reflection ViewModifier. It's not interactive, doesn't really do anything. The user can change, but it's this nice little like label with a reflection getting shown, like almost like there's a light from behind it that has a shadow coming forward and it's displaying on the ground. It's kind of something like that. So you can see on the left, we have the text "Hello World." I just wanted to give it some big font size. And then this time, instead of extending view to add this reflection onto it, I just called the modifier directly. So I called modifier function passing in our ViewModifier struct called reflection. So we have our struct reflection, which again is using the ViewModifier protocol, which has a body function that we need to create, where it passes in the content and returns some view. So this is pretty much where our no-op ViewModifier started before, where it just takes the content, returns the content. I like to start off with something like this, make it compile, make sure things work properly, even though if it's not my end result that I want. So to do this, it actually took me a bit to figure out how I wanted to do this, but it turns out that I wanted to add an overlay onto my content view. And the reason we needed to add the overlay was the overlay gets the exact same view size of the content that it's being displayed on. So I just want to take the content and then flip it over. There we go, flip it over. And in order to like have the right flip, I needed to get the size of the content so I knew how to offset it. And the overlay allows us to use Geometry Reader to get the size of the content to do that. So I first want to add some opacity to it because it should look like it's kind of like a little bit dimmer. And then here we added top padding to the overlay. That's the proxy.size.height. So I wanted to have that view kind of get the overlay get pushed down. And then I didn't want it to get pushed down fully. I just used 0.9 times the height. This could be something we pass in as a parameter, but I'm just hard coding it for this example. So then I wanted to scale it a little bit. I didn't want it to be as wide. For some reason, I wanted to shrink. Oh no, I lied. I wanted to scale the height. I wanted to make it look a little bit like it was collapsed. So it looked like we were kind of closer to it. This may have not been needed, but I added it anyway. And then this is the first time I use this API, but it's called rotation 3D effect. And you can rotate a view along the X, Y, or Z axis. In order to get this mirrored reflected image, I had to do all three. So I had to rotate it 180 to turn it, 180 to flip it, and then 45 to kind of bring it forward so it looks like it was resting on the ground. And that's our reflection view modifier. Pretty easy to call. Again, you just call, oh, that's the next one. You just call dot modifier, pass in the reflection view modifier, and you have that cool mirrored shadow effect. Oh, we have to go through this again. Okay. So the next one is this tap to unblur view modifier. I wanted something that had state, that was a little bit interactive. So this is kind of maybe you had like a secret password that you wanted to show or reveal, maybe something like 1Password, or you have like an authenticator app that has the code. Instead of just tapping to reveal it, maybe you want to make it fun and press it a bunch of times. I don't know, but it seemed kind of fun to make. So here, we call it the exact same way. We have our text, we have some big font, and then we call modifier with our tap fast to unblur view modifier, but we're going to pass in an initial blur radius. So depending on the text size, you might want a bigger blur. I'm using a bigger font size here, so blur radius of 10 didn't look good enough. So I was like, we're just gonna make it to 20. So this one, there's multiple screens here of code, but we have a struct called tap fast to unblur. It's again view modifier. This time though, instead of just having a body, we also have an initializer where we pass in the initial blur radius. So we need this initial blur radius to set the initial state, but then also to reset it after you stop tapping for a bit. So we just have a constant for our initial blur radius, and then we have our state variable that will change when tapped. Again, in our initializer, we just default it to 10, so you don't have to pass in a blur radius, but we did. Set the initial, and then create the initial state with the initial blur radius. The body, we just add a blur onto the content. Pretty magical SwiftUI API that I've never used before, but it turns out it was really easy to find. And then we're going to add a tap gesture onto our content. And I have another method in the next slide called tap to unblur, or sorry, another method called unblur that is just going to get called when tapped. So this is a continuation of our view modifier, but we have our unblur. Here, we're just gonna, with animation, when it's tapped, reset the blur radius, decrease the value by 1, and don't let it get below 0. And then we create a oh, my tabbing is a little bit messed up here. We create a dispatch work item. I'm missing a bracket after this. Dispatch work item, which will reset the blur radius to the initial blur radius with animation. And then here's where it gets a little bit fun. In the next slide, we'll see what this work item holder is, but we're going to cancel our work item if there is already one. And then we're going to set the work item to the dispatch work item create above, which will reset the initial blur. And then after 1 second, we're going to execute that dispatch work item, which resets the initial blur. So if you tap within 1 second, it's going to keep on blurring, keep on blurring, keep on blurring. Once you wait 1 second, it will reset. So because this is a struct, I had to find a way to update a variable. This might not be the best way to do this, but it worked. I have a class called work item holder in my struct that holds a variable that's optional called work item, which is a dispatch work item type. And then I just initialize the work item holder. So this allows us to update state in a struct on a class, which, I mean, it's kind of weird, but it's not the worst code I've written. And that's it for what it takes us to get our uh, tap to unblur. Uh, so we'll go back here just to watch it again. So we're tapping, 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 tapping. I didn't go all the way, so it reset. I'm just going to tap again for a bit. There it is, nice and clear. I let go, and then reset again. So, I mean, you could add some things here to once you like hit the initial, or once you make it totally unblur, it stays for a while, stays for forever. The choice is yours. This next one is my swipe buttons view modifier. So here's the example. I have a list of Power Rangers where when you swipe over, you can click the morph button, and each cell is configured differently for each Power Ranger. So the Red Ranger has red, blue, blue, black, black, pink, pink, yellow, yellow. We're going classic Power Rangers here. Could have added the Green Ranger, but he's also the White Ranger. We're just going to go with episode 1. So there's no native swipe buttons in SwiftUI yet. Maybe Dub 21, we'll find out. And this adds a swipe buttons method to any view. So it doesn't have to be on a list. I just use it on a list because that's where I want it. So the view modifier takes an array of swipe button views, which you can see is essentially that morph button that's up there. Swipe button views, in my example, take a color, an on tap, and then a content or view to display. The color is that whole like full height red or blue background. This could maybe be in the content view itself, but for some reason I didn't do that. It takes an on tap, so when you tap on morph, you can do stuff. And then the content is the image and the morph text. In this example, you can make it whatever you want. So this is how it's called. It's a really easy API to use. It was a little bit challenging to make. I'm not going to have the whole solution here. I will have this posted on my website in GitHub, so you can view all of the source for this and reuse it. Maybe I'll make it a dependency that you can pull in through SPM. We'll find out. But this is kind of an example of my thought process on creating this. But I don't want to explain this in super detail because it's not really all about the view modifiers. But this is how I used it. So we have our items array, which is an array of tuples in this example of string and the color. So red Power Ranger red, blue Power Ranger blue. We have a list with a for each where we iterate over the array, get the item and color, the item, which is the the red Power Ranger text or the blue Power Ranger text, goes in the text view. We're going to add some padding, make it look pretty. And then we call our swipe buttons. So the swipe buttons, like I said, is an array of buttons. I could have put the code directly into this area right here, but I want to make this as clean as possible. So swipe buttons just calls a method called make buttons that will make the buttons depending on the item and color. So we're going to go to the next view. This is my make buttons function. It returns the swipe button view, which has any view. I don't really like that. I couldn't figure out a way to make it not any view, but here we are. So this returns right now, it's just a kind of a hard-coded array of a single button. In an outer RSS, this is a dynamic array where I change up the number of buttons that are shown, change what the buttons show depending if they're favorited or unfavorited. So you can customize this however you want, and then it'll update the view. But here, pretty much what we do is we have a button that the color is changing based upon what's passed into this function. So the red Power Ranger gets the red button, blue Power Ranger gets the blue button, and so on. There's an on tap, which you can do stuff here. But what this does is this row object that gets passed in has a close function, which when tapped will unswipe it. It'll hide the button that's showing. I wanted to make it not automatically close in this case, so that if you had a function that took time or you just wanted like the label to change without it closing, you could do that. And then here's the content. So we have to wrap it in any view because SwiftUI. or because of my lack of understanding of something here. But I have a VStack with an image, which is the lightning bolt with the circle, the text morph, and then some font and padding to make it look good. So again, this can be configurable to however you want. It's dynamic. If you add buttons, the view will update. It's pretty powerful actually. So this is how many slides? Oh, okay. So this is the last slide I'm showing of the swipe modifier because it does get kind of dicey. There's a lot for you to show just in a presentation, but this one I had to think about a little bit differently because what I needed to do is I wanted to have this content which then swiped and it had more content. So if we skip down to the bottom, this swipe body is actually where the buttons are drawn. And the swipe modifier struct stores the buttons and then draws those in the swipe body. And it has that gesture code in there, which again you can view later on. It's nothing that is like specific to ViewModifiers, but it does have state and interaction like our previous tap to Unblur did. But what issue I ran into in this was I needed to keep the view's size to what was initially created because the swipe body extends the view with buttons on it. So there was this like really weird where like if you have dynamic content and height in your row, um, things wouldn't your views wouldn't wrap properly because it would just keep extending. Um, so this is kind of my hack to make this work, but I had a Z stack, which ends up with an H stack, which takes the row content and just puts this row content into the Z stack as it was originally passed in. Um, and then that forces this view to keep the same height because it's being wrapped properly. So this list was the exact width of the view, and then this forces that width and height to be created if that content wrapped. And then I would set the opacity to 0 because I don't actually want this showing. I just wanted the view to have the correct height. And then in the swipe body, this is where I draw the actual content that we want to show. This content's not hidden. Content is not hidden because this is the actual list item that we want swiped. Um, and then here, then there's a swipe gesture, which then draws the buttons to the right of this view. And there, when the button's pressed, it calls that on tap. And then when that close function is called, then the open state in this view will toggle off, and then with an animation, it'll close. So it's a really fun view modifier to make because there's a lot of structure here, a lot of different views that are being created. But like once you're in the view modifier, it's just like you're working in another SwiftUI view again. This was just a really weird use case with extending views like width and making things wrap. But again, I'll share this code. You can use this if you want, and it's a really clean approach to adding the buttons. And this is kind of what inspired me to learn more about how view modifiers work with state, with user interaction, and kind of like where's all the power comes in, and just making your code clean. If I didn't really know about view modifiers or understand, I probably would have had this code copy pasted a whole bunch of times with a whole bunch of hard coding for different views. Now I just have this one method I call on my view, pass in a list of buttons, and I can do some fun swipey stuff. So that is my talk on how to think like a Swift view modifier. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter at Josh D. Holtz. My GitHub username is also Josh D. Holtz, so I'll have some Swift ViewModifier examples from this talk up on there. My website is joshholtz.com. No D in the middle. But from there, I will also link to the slides and the examples I made in this talk. And if you have any questions, also you can email me. Twitter is probably the best. But thanks again for having me. I just wanted to kind of use this time to talk about my experience with SwiftUI ViewModifiers, how I messed up, how I thought about how a Swift ViewModifier actually works, verified how it works on the docs once I understood, and then kind of took those thought processes to actually create some fun, maybe useful, interactive view modifiers that I use in my apps and that you can use in yours. So thanks again, everyone. Hopefully see you all soon.